A second group of asylum seekers found in remote Western Australia, understood to be from the same boat as the first. They're all expected to be flown to Nauru as the coalition piles pressure on the government over border security. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. More than 35 asylum seekers in two separate groups have now been found after wandering into remote communities north of Broome. News of the first group was enough for Peter Dutton to declare the government's lost control of the borders, prompting a warning from the head of Operation Sovereign Borders about comments being exploited by people smugglers. The opposition had just spent the entire week grilling the immigration minister in Parliament over the release of 149 detainees after last year's High Court ruling. For its part, the government was instead using every Dorothy Dixie to keep selling its rejigged tax cuts. Immigration versus tax cuts. Question time was like Groundhog Day. Amidst it all came some personal highs and lows. The pressure grew on Barnaby Joyce, with his own leader urging him to take a break after his infamous late-night fall. And the Prime Minister proudly revealed he's getting hitched.
New documents have revealed 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders were among the detainees released.
This is the document that the government didn't want the public to see.
Not one has been sent back to immigration detention.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles need a date with the truth today.
Good morning, everyone.
And not one preventative detention order applied for.
We've set up a large team to work through the cohort and to progress towards an application as soon as we can.
The Immigration Minister has faced a barrage of questions and criticism over whether he's put community safety at risk.
Can you confirm that it is your position that none of these individuals pose a threat?
We've put in place, with the cooperation of members opposite, a range of laws.
How many of these individuals have committed an offence?
But I've already answered this question. I've already answered the question.
The thing I'm missing is an answer to a very simple question.
Progressively to move the following motion immediately. Mr Speaker, this minister has to go.
Order.
This week, Prime Minister.
No, the league's not granted. We want to talk about cost of living.
We want all Aussie taxpayers to get Albo's tax cuts.
How will the Albanese Labor government's tax cuts help healthcare workers?
How will Australian scientists and researchers benefit
those in the transport and construction industries?
Our Australian defence personnel.
Australian manufacturing workers.
More apprentice tradies.
Well, this is indeed a great day.
It was a week that began with a former Deputy Prime Minister on the floor and ended with the current Prime Minister on one knee.
He popped the question at the lodge after a Valentine's Day dinner.
I asked on the balcony, or one of the balconies.
I might be able to organise the Bucks party for Albo.
Oh, yes!
We would have his best interests at heart.
Wow!
It is a great day on so many levels, Mr Speaker. And I say this is a day in which every Australian will get a tax cut.
This bill has been agreed to.
There's another border security headache for the Albanese government, with up to 30 asylum seekers arriving by boat in Western Australia.
I've been travelling in the car. I haven't been advised about that.
Clearly, the settings that the government's got in place aren't sufficient. The Prime Minister is showing a lack of leadership.
Boats that arrive in that fashion, we have policies in place to ensure that they're dealt with. Thanks very much.
My guest this morning is the Greens housing spokesperson, Max Chandler-Mather. First, let's check what's making news. The ABC News has details of asylum seekers turning up in two remote communities in northwest Western Australia. The first group was discovered by locals around Beagle Bay, the second about 50 kilometres further north at Pender Bay. They're understood to be from Bangladesh, Pakistan and India and are expected to be transferred to Nauru. Russia's ambassador to Australia is expected to be called in to the Foreign Affairs Department to discuss the death in prison of Vladimir Putin's chief political opponent, Alexei Navalny. Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong says she's shocked and saddened, and Australia holds the Russian government solely responsible for his treatment and death. The BBC reports Navalny's mother has been unable to recover his body from Russian authorities, and more than 300 Russians have been arrested after laying tributes to Navalny following his death. And finally, Liberal MP Ian Goodenough has lost pre-selection in his marginal West Australian seat of Moore and warned of a civil war in the party after being dumped in favour of former member for Stirling, Vince Connolly. An endorsement from Peter Dutton wasn't enough to save Mr Goodenough, who's won the seat at 4 elections. He's considering whether to run again as an independent against the Liberals. We're going to start this morning with the latest border protection battle. Labor is playing down concern over the latest asylum seeker arrivals. They say these things happen from time to time and are dealt with, but the timing isn't great. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by David Crowe. Ashleigh, welcome to the Insider's Couch. And John Paul Janke, good to have you all here with us. David, look, just on these two groups of asylum seekers, as I say, we understand it's from the one boat, even though they were found quite a long way apart. What do we know about what's happened and what will happen to this group?
Well, they've turned up in 2 different communities, but it seems to be from the same boat, in 2 different drop-offs, then gone through mangroves, crocodile-infested waters, I think.
Sounds tough.
And just turned up, the latest group, 13, adding to the first group of about 24 to 30. And they turned up in an Indigenous camp yesterday morning. So that's, the first boat in some while. There was a boat late last year. Those people were then flown to Nauru, and the same is happening here. A Nauru aircraft has gone to Western Australia. I think that we'll be seeing footage of that aircraft taking off and taking these people to Nauru in the usual way of Operation Sovereign Borders, but then we get a debate about whether Operation Sovereign Borders is working.
Just on these remote communities, JP, it's worth noting, this is a pretty rugged coastline, mangroves, crocodiles, you name it, and it's often these remote communities where the Indigenous locals are the front line. They're helping people in a pretty poor situation with food, medicine, but also letting Border Force know what's happening.
Yeah, 50 kilometres apart, and it's a tough walk. It's walking in some extreme conditions there, so I think you put your life in your own hands. But there's been a call for funding Indigenous rangers and Indigenous rangers undertaking some of that activity of watching the coast and watching boats arrive. So it could be a service that Indigenous rangers provide as part of the new jobs program.
Apparently one of the Border Force officials gave a card to one of the locals and said, if you see any more, give me a call. Here's the number. Look, Peter Dutton, we know, even after it was just the first group we'd heard about, suggested that the government's lost control of the borders. Big call. And after that, the head of Operation Sovereign Borders, Rear Admiral Brett Sonter, weighed in. He issued a statement, didn't name Peter Dutton, but he said any alternate narrative will be exploited by criminal people smugglers to deceive potential irregular immigrants and convince them that their lives and travel to Australia, convince them to risk their lives and travel to Australia by boat. He's defending what they're doing to keep the borders shut. That appeared to be a bit of a slapdown, the suggestion that suddenly the borders are no longer under control. Peter Dutton, though, he's not backing away from his point.
The people smugglers see all of that and they market it. They're very savvy. They look at every word and every action of the government and they package it up, they pitch it in a sales pitch to people who are willing to pay money. And the fact is that we've got a weak Prime Minister when it comes to our borders.
Ash, what do you think? Is he just telling it like it is here, or is Peter Dutton perhaps giving encouragement to people smugglers by saying these things?
Well, look, it is a smackdown, but this is a gift to Peter Dutton, especially what we've seen last week, and we know that the coalition basically only wants to talk about immigration issues. Yep. And then this boat arrives, and it has been chaotic in terms of the 2 different groups. We still don't have exact numbers. So in terms of what Peter Dutton can go in this week as well and keep pushing points in terms of, what has Labor done here? What are the exact numbers? And we know behind the scenes Labor is scrambling, and there, lots of reasons for that. But this is good for Peter Dutton and his narrative at the moment.
As I said, look, boats have arrived on the mainland from time to time over the years, even under the coalition. It occasionally would happen, but it's the timing is the problem. As Ash says, David, after the week where the opposition was really trying to build some momentum on the release of the immigration detainees after the High Court ruling, this really fed into a narrative about border protection.
And Peter Dutton pushed it too far because he said words to the effect of the government sort of taking the legs from out from under Operation Sovereign Borders, kind of suggesting that it's actually just not working at all.
Only thing that changed is the temporary protection visas.
Exactly.
They still have offshore processing and turnbacks, and
which is what we'll see because these people will be taken to Nauru. So Operation Sovereign Borders still works in that way. It's still a functioning system that will handle these arrivals in the same way that the coalition handled similar arrivals in the past. I guess there are questions about why did we not even know that a boat was that close to the WA coast? But that's a lot of ocean to monitor, right? So there are arguments about how that system is working. But in the broad thrust of the coalition argument has been very much about the 149 detainees who've been released, huge questions over the government's handling of that, and they've really zeroed in on the government on that issue pretty much all
Well, how do you
week.
think the Minister, Andrew Giles, has handled all of that this week?
It was a sort of a classic case of dead batting every question in question time, not giving an answer at all that would provide any ammunition to the coalition. And so questions that Dan Tehan, the coalition immigration spokesman, asked, some of them were quite factual questions, just seeking a factual answer, and he couldn't get one because the government did not want to reveal anything further. I think, in fact, they're not all that happy about the revelation about the 149, the 37 sex offenders, 7 murderers, and the fact that no order has been sought to put any of them back in detention.
Some of them are a bit miffed that that list was tabled by the department without too much of a heads up. But Ash, what do you think? The questions were, why aren't some of them wearing ankle bracelets? How's the monitoring actually working? How do you think the minister went?
Well, yeah, I think he was quite successful in not generating more content. But in terms of, we know the coalition is singling out the minister, Andrew Giles, that they think he's the weak link here, and they are going him. And when, you know, we've seen in the past, this is a shared responsibility with the Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, and the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus. Now, I think that after the week that's happened, you know, and also what happened last year, I think nobody's high-fiving Andrew Giles for his performance, and he's not going around getting fist pumps either. They know that there has been problems with you know, how they have handled this. But just in terms of his performance this week, I think nobody is too concerned.
No, it's interesting. I had one or two in Labor questioning whether he's the right person for that job, but mostly they were sympathetic that he's playing that dead bat, as you say, doing it well. It's always a tough role for Labor, but not giving any further oxygen to the story.
I think when you watch Question Time, you expect better answers to a lot of these questions, and I think when a question is, with the 7 people who've been convicted of murder, do you know where they all are right now?
You need a clear answer on that.
The answer was, they're always being monitored. But it wasn't a yes. It wasn't a clear yes. And I think in these situations, I think there is a good case for some really good factual information from the government to settle people's
Well, another
minds
example
on all these scores.
was the question, what about the families of the victims of those murders? You said they were going to be contacted, have they? And initially just didn't have a very strong or clear answer as to yes or no.
The family that was asked about on Thursday has been contacted.
But he didn't. My point is, in the question time, he should have had that.
That's right. And
answer.
So the coalition has been putting the government under pressure, serious pressure on this point, with questions like that about families. And it's very hard to get it to. I mean, does it help to contact the family?
JP, look, government reckons a lot of this is just noise. People aren't really interested or engaged with it. They don't think it's really damaging them too much this week. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an issue of lack of clarity. If there's no clarity in the responses they give in question time, or in fact, you know, their conversations and their dialogue, they don't give that clarity, it's filled by a lot of noise. And we saw through the Voice referendum that noise, that misinformation, creates a lot of angst and fear in the community. So it'd be interesting to see whether governments have learnt anything about that misinformation and that fear that is spread, and how they can quickly seize on that and stop that.
The other issue that we saw this week, just on a related matter, was the report from Dennis Richardson, the former respected public service departmental secretary, former ASIO boss and so on. He looked into the contracts that Home Affairs had done with offshore processing with various companies. Scathing report, David. Links some of these companies to drug smugglers, weapons traffickers, a lack of due diligence and so on.
And hundreds of millions of taxpayer
huge amount of money
funds going to companies to run offshore detention, and lack of clarity over where that money goes, and you know, questions over whether bribes have been paid and whether huge profits have been made by the companies set up to run this system. So that's the legacy of the coalition over 9 years, and as well in Home Affairs. There's the fact that so many people arrive by air, for all the concern about people turning up by boat. So many arrive by air. When their visas expired, they claimed asylum, and there are tens of thousands of people in that situation in Australia. And that happened under the old regime as well.
And it goes to a process issue as well. We know that the previous coalition government was a bit sketchy on process, and this report went to the heart of that, about due diligence with these contracts and why process matters so much when you're dealing with taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, and I think Australian taxpayers deserve those explanations. I read a good article this week on it. The opening sentence: companies linked to suspected arms and drug smugglers, busting sanction in Iran, corruption and bribery won massive government contracts. The nation's $1 million asylum seeker offshore regime, paid lots of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. To me, it sounded like a Norwegian crime thriller that you see on SBS On Demand.
Yeah, it makes the mind boggle. All right. Time to shift to the housing debate and talk to the Greens spokesperson, Max Chandler-Mather. The latest flashpoint between Labor and the Greens when it comes to housing is over the Help to Buy scheme promised by Anthony Albanese before the election. The aim of this policy is to help those who otherwise can't afford to buy a home. It's limited to 10,000 lower income earners a year, over 4 years, so 40,000 places in total. The government would take a 30% stake in a property being purchased, or 40% if it's a new build, which means buyers then don't have to stump up quite such a big deposit. And when the property is eventually sold down the track, taxpayers would be repaid, including any appreciation on the investment. Now, the coalition is flat out opposed to the idea, which is what brings the Greens into play. In return for their support, the Greens are demanding the government do something about negative gearing, capital gains tax breaks or freezing rents. And Max Chandler-Mather's been needling the Prime Minister over his own property investments.
The idea that there will be a discussion with that sort of juvenile approach that we've seen from those opposite will not occur, because this is not a students' council, this is a parliament. And it's a parliament that has a responsibility to look after the people who put us here, not to grandstand in a way. And the key to that is supply.
Max Chandler-Mather, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we get to what you're demanding in these negotiations, what do you think of the policy idea itself? Would this Help to Buy scheme actually make things better or worse for those trying to get into the market?
Well, the government scheme would only help 0.2% of renters buy a home every year, and for the other 99.8% of renters in this country, it will actually drive up prices. It will have an inflationary impact. Because imagine you're at an auction and one person has access to this scheme, and the 99.8% who don't, they'll watch that person bid up the price of housing because they have more money from the government in their pocket, and it screws over the vast majority of people. And frankly, I don't think Australians should have to win this bizarre lottery where you've got a 0.2% chance of winning just to get an affordable home, especially when there are solutions we can pursue, like tackling the big tax handouts for property investors, like capping rent increases, like building public housing that have worked in this country before to actually make housing affordable for every Australian.
And I'll come to some of those ideas and the argument you've made that this will be inflationary. But just to pick up on what you just said, if you really think this is going to, in your words, screw over the vast majority, surely there's no way you're ever going to vote for this, right? Are you really having a negotiation, or if you think it's going to screw people over, you're never going to vote for it, are you?
No, there's a possibility for that. Last year we
You'd
had
vote
some
for something that screws people over?
Well, no, there'll be a broad net positive if we can negotiate a phase out of tax handouts for property investors, get a cap on rent increases and build public housing. Taken as a whole, that would have an enormous beneficial impact. And of course, the Greens recognise we can't get everything we want. And if we have to negotiate with the government to get through their little scheme that will have an inflationary impact on house prices, but on the other hand, we can get through changes to capital gains, tax concessions and negative gearing, then overall that would be a good thing.
Okay, so we'll come to those in a tick. But again, you've said this is going to be inflationary. Just to challenge that, the Grattan Institute says the scheme would help young Australians get into the market. Also, many older women get into the market as well. It says there would only be a modest impact on housing values. A number of other economists as well. So you're talking about a pretty minimal impact. 10,000 homes a year out of, what is it, something like 500,000 houses sold each year.
Well, even a modest impact is going to have a negative impact on people trying to buy a home, where it's already the case that millions of people are basically giving up on ever being able to buy a home. We saw the New South Wales Productivity Commission say that Sydney could become a city without grandchildren. That's how bad this crisis is. So, of course, in a situation where the government bowls up a bill where every mainstream economist said it will at least have some inflationary impact on house prices, we're going to go back to the government and say, hang on, this is the worst housing crisis we've faced in generations. Surely this can't be your only policy this year to deal with it.
But are you saying it's a modest inflationary impact, I think you just said then, or are you saying it screws people over when it comes to the inflationary impact?
Well, the point I'm making is that any extra inflationary impact on house prices is going to hurt people trying to buy a home and renters trying to buy a home. Imagine, let's break this down then. The government is coming to the Parliament with a policy that every mainstream economist said will have some upward impact on house prices in the middle of one of the worst housing crises we've faced in generations. I don't think, taken as on its own, that's a good idea.
Doesn't sound like you'll vote for it ever.
Well, I think that will be entirely determined based on the negotiations with the government and whether or not we can secure some actual substantial shifts on the big tax handouts for property investors and capping rent increases.
Okay, so what exactly do you want when it comes to negative gearing and capital gains tax breaks? Do you want them gone or just reduced? What's your actual position?
Well, we don't want to prejudice negotiations. We said we want them phased out in some form. Our 2022 election policy was to get rid of negative gearing for everyone going forward and grandfather it down to one investment property for those who do have one, and completely getting rid of the 50% discount on the capital gains tax discount. And for your listeners,
just on negative gearing, just to explain what your position at the election was, it's to grandfather existing arrangements, but only allow one property to be negatively geared?
That's correct, and then for everyone else, phase it out over 5 years. Now, this would raise billions of dollars that we could invest in building and public housing, and I think that a lot of people out there agree that we're better off spending billions of dollars building public housing than giving tax handouts to people with 5, 10, 20 investment properties that mean it's easier for someone to buy their 10th investment property and harder for someone to buy their first.
So but just sticking with what your policy at the moment is, if you currently own multiple properties like some of your Greens colleagues, Nick McKim, Marine Faruqi, they own, I think, 4. They would have to sell those and only hold one?
No, not sell them. They just wouldn't get access to negative gearing.
Right, okay. So they would lose their tax break. Your colleagues would lose their tax break and they'd just have one negatively geared property.
And I'm glad you brought that up, David, because that's the point we made in Parliament this week, that it's remarkable that we have a property investor Prime Minister and a Labor caucus where 75% of their parliamentarians own investment properties, and they are opposing any changes to tax handouts for property investors. I'm proud of the fact that every colleague in the Greens party room is fully prepared tomorrow, wherever we get a chance, to vote to phase out those tax handouts. And I think part of the reason people
you're still going to let them keep some of their investment properties.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the context of this political debate is we're trying to bowl up a proposal that could generate broad public support. And I think too often, it's funny because often the Greens are accused of going too far, and perhaps the implication in your question is that maybe we could go further. Always happy to have a debate about that.
No, I'm just pointing out that you're claiming purity on the part of the Greens, but you're not actually getting rid of the property investments that some of your colleagues still hold. Look, just on negative gearing and what impact it has on rents, do you agree that the whole principle is you can make a loss? That's the point of negative gearing. That does keep some downward pressure on rents. Do you accept that argument?
No, I don't at all, and for two reasons. One, we saw the Grattan Institute report on impacts of phasing out negative gearing say there would be no impact on rents. There may actually be downward pressure on rents because one of the things these tax handouts in combination have done, including the capital gains tax discount, is deprive a lot of renters the chance to buy a home. So when Howard introduced that capital gains tax discount, there was about 26% renters in this country, and now there's 30%. Now, if those changes hadn't happened, we'd have an extra 400,000 renters who could have bought a home, taking a lot of pressure off the rental market. The perfect storm we have in the rental market at the moment is precisely because the government are supporting policies that prevent renters from ever being able to buy a home and allowing investors to buy homes instead.
Most economists, again, say there would be an immediate jump in rents, though. Over the longer term, you might get what you're talking about. What are you relying on here, and when do you think you would see rents eventually come down?
Well, I disagree, David. That's not most economists. And we know that when negative gearing was briefly phased out in the 80s in Australia, actually rents, for instance, in Brisbane went down. And in Adelaide, they went down a little bit as well. What these tax handouts do is encourage massive speculation in the property market. Last year in December, there was almost twice as many purchases of investor properties as there were first home buyer purchases. What that means is you have a market geared towards generating a lot of money for people with a lot of investment properties. And in combination with introducing a nationally coordinated cap on rent increases, what you'd see is more renters exiting the rental market as they're able to buy a home for the first time in their lives. A lot of people have given up on that. While if they're in the rental market, what you'll see is caps and limits on rent increases, or at the very least, even if you don't get that, you'll have them competing with less renters because for the first time, a lot more will be able to buy a home.
The Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy gave evidence this week at a Senate hearing. He was talking about the main problem in the housing market being constraints around supply and faster than anticipated population growth. I'll come to population, but on supply, do you support generally higher density in our big cities to boost supply?
Good medium density is good, but I'll just quickly note on supply, the implication always in that argument is we somehow need to relax the rules for property developers. Look, property developers, as long as they're in charge of supplying housing, will only ever supply housing at a rate that generates them a profit and sees house prices continue to go up. We know this because over the last 20 years, basically property developers have got whatever they want. Now, if we want to deal with this issue, then the government should start building public housing at a scale that they used to. In the 20th century, it used to be 30% at some points of all construction was of good public housing for workers. And on the other end, on the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing, what we're seeing is property investors hoard homes that could go to first home buyers. Over 80% of all property investor purchases go on existing dwellings. So really what we've got is this perfect storm.
But just back to this issue around higher density. Currently, you've got the New South Wales Premier in a battle with a bunch of mayors in Sydney over his effort to change the zoning laws there. This all goes to more infill, more high density in Sydney. Whose side are you on this one?
Well, that won't change a thing because what we know right now is the planning system is not the barrier to fixing the housing crisis. So the latest data suggests that there are a record number of approved developments in Australia that developers are not building. And what that means actually is that developers are either sitting on that land because they don't want to build until it's profitable to do so. Maybe they're waiting until it's a bit easier for them to build. So really changing the planning system, all that does is put money in the pockets of property developers because when you rezone land, it drives up the price of that land and puts more money in the pocket of developers. Again, if you want to fix the housing crisis, you're much better off building good quality public housing for teachers and workers, not just the worse off, and phasing out those massive tax handouts for property investors that will cost the budget tens of billions of dollars over the next few years.
No, I understand your point on that. Look, on population growth, the other part of this, we saw migration hit a record number last year, 510,000. The government's confident it's going to be able to halve that. What role do you think migration plays when it comes to house prices?
It might have some effect on short-term fluctuations, but I think this debate around migration is a huge distraction, because when we talk about immigrants or migration, we're talking about the nurses, teachers, we're talking about construction workers, the people this country needs. Secondly, we saw during COVID, net migration reached near zero and house prices continue to go up. The major problem with our housing crisis is the fact that property is treated as a massive speculative asset that drives up the price of housing.
But on migration, do the Greens want higher or lower migration?
Look, we just don't think that migration is a major cause of the housing crisis. And
major,
look,
but you did say a component though, didn't you?
Well, might be short-term fluctuations, but again, let's be very clear that what we know is that there were 1 million vacant properties on the night of the census in 2021. A million vacant properties. I just want to be very clear. We have enough homes for people to live in. We have enough construction materials to build the homes for the new people coming to this country. What we don't have is the political will to take on a housing system that will on property developers who constrict supply to make money for themselves and treats housing as a huge speculative asset.
So I'm not sure I got an answer though on whether you'd like higher or lower migration.
Well, we'll take a policy to the next election.
You must have an idea, though.
The country should be.
You've thought a lot about this space. Would you like more or less migration?
Well, we've said, again, that we'd like to see a big increase in the number of refugees that this country is taking. Again, I just think this is we're happy to take a policy to next election on this, and certainly in the past we've taken policies that increase our refugee intake. But again, this is not the cause of the housing crisis. To give you
it's a concern for a lot of people. I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with that. You're just not sure at the moment whether it should be a higher or lower intake?
Well, in general, I think more people coming to this country is a good thing, because we are desperately short of healthcare workers, we're desperately short of construction workers, we're desperately short of the people we need to make this country work, aged care as well. And again, I can't emphasise this enough. House prices will keep going up, rents will keep going up unless we put limits on rent increases and we deal with the massive tax handouts for property investors that are screwing over millions of people trying to buy a home.
Yeah, okay. Just a quick one finally. Issues of alcohol in the building at Parliament House. Been a lot of focus on this over the last couple of weeks. Where do the Greens stand on these ideas about either banning alcohol in the building or even alcohol and drug testing members of Parliament? What do you think?
Well, look, I mean, I think people justifiably expect a high standard for politicians that they don't always deliver on. Look, personally, in general, I don't think drug test and alcohol testing in any workplace is necessarily a good idea, but certainly I think people are justifiably upset at the standard politicians hold themselves to.
All right. Max Chandler-Mather, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Coming up, we will look at the fallout from the Barnaby Joyce incident of a week or so ago, and his leader, David Littleproud, suggesting he take a break. First, let's continue this conversation with our panel. We're joined once again by David Crowe, Ashleigh and John Paul Janke. David, just on housing, the current fight is over the Help to Buy scheme. The PM's basically said take it or leave it. He doesn't sound like he's interested in the negotiation. It doesn't sound like the Greens are that enamoured with the policy idea.
I think that Max Chandler-Mather, who, by the way, speaks a mile a minute, doesn't he? There's so much there, but the criticism of Help to Buy, it's very interesting because, of course, it is a relatively small scheme. It's 40,000 homes. The government takes equity in those homes, so it helps a very small slice of the population. At the moment, the Greens don't seem to like it, but at the same time, they're offering Labor a deal. If we vote for Help to Buy, we'll get our changes on negative gearing. I mean, to me, that looks like a scene out of a Roadrunner comic, you know. We get the gold bar, you get the ticking time bomb. I don't see any incentive for the government to actually accept that deal. My sense from the Labor caucus is, yeah, there are concerns about negative gearing. They're not in a rush. There's not a huge momentum and a huge push to get something done on negative gearing right now. They've got to see how the debate goes on the stage 3 tax cuts, broken promise that they've done, see where the dust settles. I think negative gearing would be a longer issue.
I think you'd have to go to an election, basically, wouldn't it, Ash?
Seek a mandate.
Yes, absolutely. After the changes to the stage 3 tax cuts, you can't then now, and it has been quite positive and they are riding that wave of positivity. they are very nervous. You don't add in negative gearing at this stage because all that work could then possibly be undone. And on the Help to Buy, I think Labor's made it very clear they don't want to negotiate essentially with a gun to their head on this with the Help to Buy. And there is a way, the legislation was in the Parliament starting to be debated this week, but there is a number of steps for this to happen as well, because the states have to legislate as well. So even when this gets up and running, we're looking quite far down the track. And New South Wales and Victoria, the state governments have their own schemes already up and running, and there hasn't been a huge uptake in it. And it is a very small kind of group that it is targeted at. But at this stage, you know, the overarching federal one still has a number of issues, and will be some.
Yeah, I'm sure most buyers would probably prefer to go it alone without having the government owning a stake, but it's a question of those on the margin that might be helped. I want to turn to the Closing the Gap report during the week, 16 years on from the Kevin Rudd delivering that apology to the stolen generation. Look, it's a pretty familiar story. Every year you get some progress and some areas where we're going backwards. Here was the latest results. These are the areas where we are on track to actually hit the targets that have been set. Early childhood education, economic participation, youth incarceration. That's the good news. But the bad news is we're still going backwards in these four areas: social and emotional wellbeing, early childhood development, adult incarceration rates, and children in child protection system. There's a bunch of other areas where there's improvement, but not enough to say that we're on track. JP, why? Why are we still having this same issue every year where we're still going backwards in some areas?
Yeah, I think it's sad each year to see us going backwards and not even making progress in some of the areas that we think we should be making progress. I think it's about structural reform, and one of the elements of the Voice was actually giving that structural reform and giving that advice to all government about changing the way that we do things. It was one of the main recommendations of the Productivity Commission report that there needs to be major structural reform. Otherwise, we're just going to keep coming back to the same results, if not worsening results, every year. The Green Senator, Dorinda Cox in WA, in estimates on Friday, she actually, I think, pushed the bureaucrats to say what is actually happening for structural reform. We need structural reform in this space.
The government did have a couple of announcements to go with the latest results on Closing the Gap. One was $700 million or thereabouts for real jobs, it says, in remote communities, changing the way the community development program works. Peter Dutton, well, he kind of welcomed that but said he'd like a bit more detail.
From which sectors, industries and employers will these jobs come? What infrastructure is or will be put in place to support these jobs? And will that require additional funding, and if so, how much?
Yeah, David, is it clear what's changing here with this $700 million?
The commitment is the investment in a new jobs scheme that replaces the CDP, existing kind of work for the dollar kind of scheme. Some of the key elements of that announcement were details will be forthcoming in the future about how exactly it would happen on the ground. So there's a lot of negotiation and consultation to happen about how that scheme would work. I thought one of the most important messages this week is that they focused on jobs as one element of the response on Closing the Gap. Clearly, as you've just seen, there are many areas where there are problems, and we didn't really hear about new initiatives in some of those areas as well.
There was another announcement for an Indigenous Children's Commissioner. This has been something pushed for a long time. What's that going to do?
Well, yeah, this has been long promised, and I think what it'll do is sort of a more national approach in addressing the issue of the out-of-home care issue, and that is one of the targets that is going backwards, that child protection, because that has really fallen to the states in the past. So this actually will give national oversight and national responsibility on that.
Yeah. You then had, of course, a lot of focus on this being the first Closing the Gap report since the failure of the Voice referendum, and where are things at in terms of those other elements of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which the Prime Minister committed to, not just the Voice. So truth-telling, treaty as well. The Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, says they remain committed to truth-telling as to what is actually going to happen. Here she was.
I'm having discussions with the Cabinet about that, and I'm not going to go in those discussions, but the issue of truth-telling is incredibly important, and there are many ways in which that can happen, including school curriculum.
Yeah, that could be interesting. JP, what is happening with truth-telling?
Yeah, look, there seems to be a long, extensive consultation process being undertaken. The jobs program, they're saying that it's going to be maybe rolled out in the second half of the year, after months of consultation with key stakeholders, Indigenous communities and organisations. There seems to be that holding pattern, same with truth-telling and treaty, that they're going back out to seek the community's advice on the way forward. Some interesting questions being asked in the cross-portfolio estimates on Friday. You had Senator Price pushing the bureaucrats to reveal what money has already been allocated to Makarrata, truth-telling and treaty. On the other side, you had Senator Thorpe saying, why hasn't money been spent on this? Because this was a commitment at the election to implement the Uluru Statement, and these are the other elements of the Uluru Statement. The other thing I think we need to be conscious of is that the referendum, the no case, the no got up, and it was about a constituted voice, a body, changing the constitution. It wasn't about truth-telling or referendum, but I just think there seems to be some sort of delaying to maybe test the waters post-referendum.
I think this is really interesting because the referendum outcome was about the voice, but voice, treaty, truth has been a big issue, the big, push for many years. And I think what we're seeing now, let's face it, is the aftermath of the referendum, where it's not only a setback for the voice, it's a setback for treaty and it's a setback for truth and the Makarrata Commission. So the government's finding a different way to do it. They're relying on the states to deal with treaty. Yeah. That was clear in the PM's speech this week. And now they're suggesting these different ways of truth-telling. School curriculum, that's an interesting idea. So they're finding a different path because the coalition won that referendum. The coalition agenda won, and so the government is taking a different approach in the wake of a pretty clear message from the referendum.
And the concern deferring to the states with treaty, and we know, we just look at the two biggest states, the New South Wales government last year, the Minns government, when they won, they took that. They're really nowhere on it and saying it's years away, that if they do a treaty process, it won't be until after the next election in New South Wales, which is more than 3 years away. Now, Victoria is more advanced. They've set up the treaty authority and negotiation, will start. Yeah. But we're still talking, years away. So there's been this sort of stalling and setback, which was the concern of people within the yes camp of the referendum, that if the referendum didn't get up, what that would mean for everything else. And we're seeing that now.
Yeah, but it was a concern to all Indigenous communities. They were saying that we've been waiting so long to really progress treaties in this country that post-referendum there seems to be no priority, as maybe there was before the referendum.
The culture of drinking in Parliament, asked Max Chandler-Mather about that at the end of the interview. We'll get to Barnaby Joyce, but there's another case study, if you like, that's certainly getting a lot of attention. That's the Nationals Deputy Leader, Perrin Davey. Now, she insists she was not drunk, but she had had a drink or two at a National Party staff function before appearing at a Senate hearing, a Senate estimates hearing, where she was asking questions. People can make up their own mind. Here was a bit of it.
Super happy to hear it. I think it's a great thing, and I know it started under our government, and I'm very happy that it is continuing under this government.
As I say, David, she says she was not drunk, but had a drink or two at this event. It does raise the question about whether you should be drinking before working in a Senate hearing.
There are famous cases where that's come up in the past and people haven't turned up to votes and so forth. And in the wake of the Barnaby Joyce attention and incident, this is quite different, because he was out on a public street, not a good look. He's embarrassed about it. He cops the shame for that in the media. But this is somebody who's actually at work in a Senate estimates hearing in the business of the Parliament. I mean, that's got the privilege of the chamber, asking questions, and I can't see what can be done about it other than public attention being brought to bear on the conduct of parliamentarians when things like this happen, because you get a debate about what can Parliament do. Parliament cannot expel a member for bad behaviour. We can't have that system. All it can do is draw attention to bad behaviour and say, look, I don't think that's.
I mean, they could do drug and alcohol testing, but they're not going to.
And what's the sanction anyway?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it does go to the culture of the place. And, up there at Parliament House, meant to be the greatest political minds in the country, why were the Nationals having staff drinks the week after the Barnaby incident? Wouldn't somebody say, I don't know if this is a good idea?
Yeah. Look, I think everyone agrees that there's been general improvement when it comes to events in the building that happened earlier. There's less drinking going on, but there's still plenty of alcohol in the building. I just want to get some thoughts too on the dynamic in the National Party, because after the Barnaby Joyce being pictured lying flat on his back on Lonsdale Street in Braddon, his leader, David Littleproud, has urged him now to take a break.
There's some family circumstances that his family need to deal with, and I encouraged him to take some time to deal with that emotionally, to make sure that his family understood that he was there for them, but that we were there for Barnaby, that we were going to create an environment for him to be able to address those issues.
There's no sign Barnaby Joyce is going to heed that suggestion, heed that advice and take a break, or even bow out at the next election.
Absolutely. Interesting to say take a break, but not really be able to enforce it. Back to the Senator Parent thing, I think this happens in a building where everything is recorded. It happened in estimates, which is recorded. There's Hansard. I just think the thinking to go into that room when you admit to having one or two drinks and behaving like that.
It's happened before. It'll probably happen again.
Yeah.
The thing about Barnaby is, he told colleagues before that incident that he wasn't seeking the leadership. Now, you always take that with a grain of salt when you hear people say that kind of thing. But I think this puts to rest any idea that he would come back to the leadership. But there's still unrest in that party room. There's always constant, rivalry in the Nats party room. It's relatively small but quite combustible. And so there's still a way to go in sort of how things settle down in that party room. At the moment, he's got a big crusade that he's on. He's running this anti-wind turbine thing, really trying to G that up. And so I think he does become an important figure to watch in the next climate debate. That's going to happen.
And it's almost like the Nationals are at a fork in the road. They're trying to almost modernise under Littleproud and talk about, renewable energy and going forward. And you've got Barnaby Joyce and his camp resisting. And just in my conversations with New South Wales Nationals this week, a lot of them, that Barnaby represents the old way. And even with him just, lying on the ground, they're saying, it's 2024, not 1964. So there's that feeling that there is that camp around Barnaby is perhaps holding back the Nationals as they try and go forward in terms of expanding in regional areas. They need to get younger, women, people voting for them in regional areas and stay relevant as those regional areas expand and those Nationals, votes still stay. So how that party moves forward, and there is concern that perhaps Barnaby is hindering that at this stage.
I want to turn to what's happening in Gaza, and the Prime Minister during the week joined his counterparts from Canada and New Zealand in issuing a statement really urging Israel not to mount a ground operation in the southern city of Rafah. There's no sign Benjamin Netanyahu is going to take up their suggestion. He appears set on this course. I spoke a short time ago to the ABC's Global Affairs editor John Lyons in Jerusalem, where he's on assignment for Four Corners. John, thanks so much for joining us. Look, more than half of Gaza's population is now crowded into that southern city of Rafah. What is the latest? Will Israel mount a ground operation there?
Well, David, Israeli negotiators and senior people involved in the war are saying that the plans are going ahead of an invasion into Rafah. They're not saying when that will be, but as you say, serious concerns, especially from Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, who has said there's up to 1.4 million people crowded in there. They've all moved from the north of Gaza to the centre and then south. Israel telling them to move south. So you now have 1.4 million people or so crowded into a very small area. Antony Blinken has warned about the possible humanitarian crisis that could bring about, and groups like the Norwegian Refugee Council are warning, their word is that this could be a bloodbath. So certainly there's a lot of international concern.
Look, John, just on that, this intensifying pressure from world leaders, we see it from Anthony Albanese, but particularly from Joe Biden, the US president, how is that being felt in Israel?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is actually returning fire in a way, diplomatically, and he is saying that whoever is telling us not to operate in Gaza is telling us to lose the war. Now, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has a long history of staring down US presidents successfully from his point of view. Famously, when he first met Bill Clinton, who was president at the time, when he left the room, Bill Clinton turned to his advisors and said, "Who's the effing superpower here? It's us, not him." And so now Benjamin Netanyahu is saying we will go into Rafah despite America's concerns. Washington is saying clearly they want three things. They want an immediate new hostage deal. They want a temporary ceasefire, which Washington wants extended into a more permanent ceasefire, and they want a two-state solution. But Benjamin Netanyahu is being leveraged from the right wing, the far right wing. Two of the leaders there, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, are saying no, no, no to all three. And so Benjamin Netanyahu, for his own political survival, is actually saying no to Washington.
Extraordinary. John Lyons, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it does appear to be another high-stakes moment, particularly with the divergence between Washington and Israel on this. I want to look at the domestic standing points because, as mentioned, you've got the Australian government, the Albanese government, really ratcheting up pressure on Israel in a way perhaps we haven't seen over recent months when it comes to this situation in Rafah. Here was the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong.
Large-scale military operations in densely populated areas risks extensive civilian casualties. Australia believes this would be unjustifiable. Our message to Israel is listen to the world, do not go down this path.
And yet, David, you've got Peter Dutton not willing to offer any such criticism. He's all in with Netanyahu and Israel.
And we have seen that stronger message from the coalition in Israel's favour over months, but now it's so starkly apparent with stronger language from Anthony Albanese as well. The letter that Anthony Albanese wrote with leaders from Canada and New Zealand called for an immediate ceasefire, used the same language that Penny Wong just used there in Senate estimates, do not go down this path. The letter says it would be catastrophic if the Israeli Defence Force moved on Rafah. So that's much stronger language from the federal government, very big difference. I think it's also worth mentioning that the government's also looking at the domestic side on some of this. When the doxing happened earlier or last week with 600 members of the Jewish community, Anthony Albanese was pretty much straight onto that as an act of anti-Semitism and announced on radio there would be law brought forward to make it criminal to do that kind of doxing. So on the domestic front, with a very highly flammable debate in Australia, he's acting at the same time that there's this message to Israel, don't make it worse.
Yeah, all right. Well, our panel, John Paul Janke, Ashleigh Raper and David Crowe, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now, though, for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with political reporter for Channel 9, the one and only Amanda Kopp. And congratulations on the new job.
Thank you very much, Mike.
It was the 16th anniversary of the national apology to the stolen generations this week.
Yeah, it was. I reckon that we should have a few more sorries in Parliament House.
There was a definite collegiate feel to the whole thing, which has been sadly missing from many other activities this week. The Closing the Gap report also came out, and so many areas still need so much work.
It was particularly poignant after the Voice referendum as well.
They have the breakfast. This year it was in the Great Hall, which gave it a sense of occasion, I think.
This is always something that I find fascinating about politics. This is Warren Mundine, who campaigned very heavily against the Voice, and here he is having a laugh with the PM. People do seem to forgive in this place.
Yes. David Pope has cartooned on this, and the Voice van is a little bit broken here. Perhaps they should use, if there's any fuel in this tin, to finish it off.
What I really noticed here was just how sad the PM's looking, and he's not really doing much.
Well, he's not even in the driver's seat, is he?
No, just a passenger.
Just a passenger. Amanda, some people think that Barnaby Joyce is the life of the party, but not everyone in his own party agrees. What did you make of the Lonsdale Street lying down incident.
I mean, look, Mike, who hasn't ended up on the floor on a Wednesday night?
Yes. David Rowe, Politics Now, number 847, Monday morning. This is the share house from hell.
I know, here we have poor Peter Dutton and David Littleproud, the leader of the Nationals, just trying to have a nice quiet morning in their coalition bed, and guess who's here?
Yeah, you have the right to disconnect now, Barnaby, with a pretty ordinary looking chook out the window there. David Littleproud's...
It's almost like he's falling asleep on the job here.
Peter Brollman has picked up, that's our Barnaby, man of the streets, ear to the ground, telling it like it is.
The number of scandals that this man has weathered is honestly incredible.
I know. It seems that almost with every passing scandal, his popularity within his electorate goes up. Anatomy of a Fall. This is a Iflens cartoon here.
And up here, you know, current Uber rating, 3.5 stars. That's not so bad.
I think that the ACT should just embrace this, because there's been a number of chalk drawings this week around the site where it was in Lonsdale Street. It even very briefly appeared on Google Maps as Barnaby Joyce's planter.
Apparently that's gone now.
Yeah. The photographers photographed Barnaby during question time. He didn't look great though.
Well, I don't know how these people come back to work, to be honest.
Have you been following the Barnaby art?
I have.
Yeah.
It's been great.
This is Jeffrey Smart's Carl Expressway. We've got Barnyard Expressway.
I know, beautiful. We've got some surrealist urbanism here.
Yep. The other person that had a really tough week was the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Andrew Giles.
He sure did.
Like, it was just bunny in the headlights.
For anyone who wasn't paying attention to question time, it was every single question from the opposition was to this poor man.
Just the exhale of air, you can see, here we go. I think he was pretty pleased that the week came to an end. And finally, a yes that worked. The Prime Minister asked Jodie Hayden to marry him and she said yes.
Yeah, look, it was a rough no vote for the Prime Minister over the Voice campaign. Finally, he's got a yes.
I hope Albo does a better job of selling the yes case this time, as the punters are saying here, with Toto. David Rose got the War Room Politics Now. It's only one yes, says Dutton.
Yeah, look, for an opposition that says no to everything, it looks like this is the only yes that they can accept.
They're going to accept this one. It was a genuine first for me. I had never been to the Lodge before and performed a engagement picture opportunity, and that happened, and I was a little disappointed Toto wasn't there, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so was I. Wanted to ask what Toto thought of the whole thing.
Exactly.
But if they do get married while he's still the PM, that'll be the first time that's ever happened in this country.
Amanda, it's been a great pleasure unpicking the events of this very long political week, and I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike. Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Mike. And hey, if anyone's ever wondered about Mike's commitment to the job after that photo opportunity at the Lodge with the happy couple, take a look at this. They take off, Bowers in hot pursuit. Have a look.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Still got it. Just on the happy news, everyone's got advice, their 2 cents for them as to when it should be, how big it should be, who should be invited.
Oh, yes, I do not envy Jodie at all. Yeah. Weddings are political enough just with families, let alone putting actual politics in it.
Yeah, look, good luck to them. All right, let's get some final observations. JP.
Yeah, just the passing of Lower Chair O'Donoghue a couple of weeks ago. I had the great opportunity to work with Lower Chair in the 90s. She spoke at the Constitutional Convention in the late 90s. And she said to all delegates, leave your egos outside the door. There's too many egos in this room to actually make progress on the debate. I think it's a great thing to remember for the chamber up at the House trying to close the gap.
Some excellent advice. Ash?
We know that Peter Dutton told the Coalition Party Room, get ready for an election, which means pre-selections, looking at female representation, and are they going to address their women problem? It's still under 30%. We know that there are 3 women retiring. They haven't done anything to address that with the vacancies that have come up in this term. And we've got the pre-selection happening in Cook, Scott Morrison's seat. It's shaping up to be a contest between 2 men. There is a woman there. When are they going to be serious about pre-selecting women in winnable Liberal seats?
Yes, they're running out of opportunities to do that. David?
The news at the beginning of the program about the murder of Alexei Navalny really highlights so much that's troubling in the world. The anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is 10 days away or so. That highlights how long it's going to take to really deal with Putin's Russia. Anthony Albanese committed $50 million last week. There's still $61 billion in help for Ukraine stuck in the US Congress. There's a long way to go in that conflict.
Sure is. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Now, finally, the prospect of a prime ministerial wedding also raises the tantalising question of who will get an invite and who will miss out. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Our congratulations and best wishes to you. We look forward to our version of the royal wedding sometime in the near future. I'll be there throwing roses out in front of you, Prime Minister, whatever it takes to get an invite to the gala wedding.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.